Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today with a new deck profile for Fusion Elemental Heroes. This, again, if you've seen the duel video for this week, is more of just a for fun challenge video. I wondered what would happen if you try to limit yourself to just fusion monsters in that extra deck. What would actually happen? It wouldn't be competitive, obviously, because you're handicapping yourself and not giving yourself access to the full card pool. But nonetheless, I wanted to see what kind of core main deck could I come up with that would allow me to bring out the fusions, and how far away or close to competitive could it possibly be. So if you're interested in seeing just the alphabetical deck profile, you can click polymerization right here. There's an annotation that'll take you to the end. It'll just be alphabetical by card type as usual. Otherwise, we're going to go through the step-by-step process of how to build this deck. As usual, the first step is going to be to build the deck core, and we're going to start off today with 3 copies of Elemental Hero Blazeman. This is a monster that says if it's normal or special summoned, you can add a polymerization from your deck to your hand, and that's one of its abilities. Its second ability, which you have to choose, either between the first or the second, is once per turn during your main phase, you can send an Elemental Hero monster from your deck to the graveyard, except another copy of Blazeman, and if you do, this card's attack and defense copy that monster's, its attribute changes to that monster's attribute as well until the end of the turn, but you can only fusion summon fusion monsters rather, for the rest of the turn. And so the interesting thing with Blazeman is as soon as I saw this thing, I thought, okay, this is pretty similar to Elemental Hero Prisma. You're able to go and fetch a hero straight from the deck, but it even serves as kind of a Stratos in that it lets you add a polymerization to your hand, which is something that we hadn't had as a +1 in this strategy before. So I wanted to think, okay, how can we take advantage of that strategy? And what I came to was we can use the Blazeman to search polymerization as you would expect, but then combine it with Elemental Hero Shadow Mist. Now, if you guys remember, this guy is really popular in Master Hero builds because he has the ability, or she has the ability, to go fetch Mass Change straight from your deck. Usually you go for something like Dark Law and then create this annoying board that your opponent has to deal with, but Shadow Mist has that second ability where if she's sent to the graveyard in any way, once per turn, you can go and add a hero monster from your deck to your hand. Much like Blazeman, you can only use one of her effects each turn, so you can't use both, and that's just to keep everything balanced. They didn't want to have everything go with how Stratos was multi-purpose multiple times a turn, which I personally still don't think is ban-worthy, but nonetheless, they did have that type of abusability in mind when they limited both of these to one effect per turn. But if you look between here, we can now add polymerization to the deck, and what that does is we can normal summon our Blazeman, get a free polymerization, use Shadow Mist as a material, so then we get these 3 cards turn into a fusion monster. But because the Shadow Mist gets us another card back, and because the Blazeman got us a free polymerization, you're really only using these 2 cards, and this replaces itself, which means we get Blazeman to turn into a fusion monster, which is pretty good considering fusions normally, by game mechanics, are a -2 in terms of card economy. So we're going to try and flesh out the core by using this core engine here, and to make sure that we hit these 3 key cards, or yes, these 2 key monsters. Polymerization really is something we get off of that Blazeman. We're going to be maxing out on E-Emergency Call, pretty standard in hero builds. This just lets you add either one of these to your hand and adds a lot of consistency because now we can get extra materials through Shadow Mist, or we can even get Blazeman for the free poly. And then of course the 1 Rhoda, just so we have 4 copies. You would be maximizing on both of these most of the time anyway. Then, because this is a fusion-oriented strategy, we can go ahead and play 3 copies of Fusion Recovery. This thing lets you go and add a polymerization and any one monster you use as a fusion material from your graveyard to your hand. So, you get that free polymerization back, but if you add that Shadow Mist to your hand, now you have the ability to go and make the same play next turn, or you could even make it that same turn if you were just going for a game-winning push. Again, since you only get these effects once per turn, you probably would want to wait, and that's one of the inherent slow factors of this deck. It's that you are limited to once per turn. But Fusion Recovery helps make sure you don't lose steam. And finally for the core, This is pretty much a supplement to the Fusion Recovery. Warrior Returning Alive lets you add any warrior from your graveyard to your hand. So it could be one of these, it could be one of the fusions we go through later, some of the other heroes we go through. But because it doesn't add polymerization, and we are planning on fusion summoning every single turn, I decided let's go and maximize on the Fusion Recovery first, and then we can go back and revisit the number on Warrior if we need more. Because this is a fusion deck, we have to make sure that we have powerful fusions that are actually worth running. To cover that, we will be playing one of each of the Omni heroes with one exception. Great Tornado is not in here, and that's mainly because without Stratos, I just don't see a reason to play Avian just to run Great Tornado. And so instead of playing that, I decided to go with a single copy of the Absolute Zero, or an additional copy of Absolute Zero over the Great Tornado, mainly because these Omni heroes pretty much exist so that if we have one of every attribute that it represents, we can go for it very easily, and that maximizes our play options at all times. In addition, the Omni heroes are just the easiest way to add range to a deck that's limiting itself. Again, we're not using any Xyz monsters, so that means we have to get as much coverage as possible in terms of abilities, and the Omni heroes are just the easiest, most accessible way to do that. The double Absolute Zero is in here because you can always fuse an Absolute Zero into Absolute Zero as just a water monster, and that lets us trigger its Raigeki effect while keeping another Raigeki floater on the board, so that's still pretty cool. The Blaze Man is covering the Nova Master, and the Shadow Mist is covering the Escuridao, so we just need to add a water, light, and an earth monster. For water, I am playing one Ocean. Again, Bubble Man is pretty much the standard for normal hero variants, but because we're limiting ourselves to fusions, we just don't have a purpose for Bubble Man. Its special summon effect is only really relevant for Xyz summons, or maybe Mass Change if you happen to set it a turn before and the quick play spell can be played from face down. The draw effect almost never happens, and its 800 attack score is actually even weaker than Ocean, almost by half, because Ocean has 1500. So in this limited format that I've imposed on myself, Ocean is a far superior card, and that's something important to keep in mind if for whatever reason, whether it's a new ban list or new cards have come out or whatever, if the format changes because the card pool available to you has changed, you really have to look at card options again and be able to think, is this still relevant in the new environment? You can't just take everything that people play in advanced format and take it as the standard if your place is different. For lights, we are playing just the one elemental hero, Sparkman, not Neos Alias, mainly because Neos Alias is a solid beater, but we have uses for Sparkman that we'll get to in terms of fusions in just a bit, so that's why I want to make sure we're playing Sparkman. For Earth, we're playing a couple. First off, we're playing Wildheart. This guy's unaffected by traps, which is pretty good, but not always relevant. It just depends. I mean, you're not gonna dodge Solemn with it because you'll just get negated outright, but if you're playing against something like Bottomless or Compulsory Ring of Destruction or just a random trap like that, it can squeeze in 1500 points out of nowhere. The main purpose is, just like Sparkman, we're gonna use Wildheart for some fusion summons, and that's why he's in there, for that name. And to go along with that Wildheart, we're playing a Blade Edge. This is mainly because he has a 26 attack score that we can easily access with Blaze Man. So now all of a sudden you can normal summon a 26 that can take out monsters your opponent wasn't planning on losing in battle. For the other fusion heroes, we're going to be playing 2 copies of King of the Swamp to gain access. So King of the Swamp has an ability that's pretty much like Fusion Sage. You can discard it to add a polymerization from your deck to your hand, but because it's not a spell that's activated, in some ways it's even harder to stop. So very useful effect there, just helps us get polymerization. You can use it as a water material for Absolute Zero if you have no other purpose for it, but its actual second ability is to serve as a fusion substitute monster, which will let us bring out one of these two. So Plasma Vice needs Blade Edge and Sparkman, which we happen to be playing already, and its ability is you could pierce your opponent with its 26 attack, which is pretty good, so if your opponent's playing defensively, just knock them out of the game real easily like that. Or, if they have a monster you can't pierce, it's in attack position, you can discard a card from your hand and just pop it. Now, I do realize 101, Castel, all these other Xyz monsters are so much better at getting rid of cards nowadays, and that just shows you the level of power creep that has happened since Plasma Vice was released, probably back in like 2007 or something. So, realistically, I wouldn't be playing this in a full hero deck, but given, again, our limited card pool, we still need options for removal, and this is just the best option we have for heroes. Necroid Shaman is interesting. It does get rid of something for free regardless of discarding, but because you bring something back, unless you can combo it by bringing back a weak monster that doesn't trigger if it's destroyed again or whatever. It's just too much of a risk. Plasma Vice is probably your best bet for removal on monsters. Similarly, Wild Wingman needs Wild Heart with Avian. We're not playing Avian, but we can use one of these as name. And it lets us turn any card in our hand to MST, which is very good for getting rid of annoying cards that might be hindering our game plan. So it helps us just clear for game and make sure that our plays stick when we want to make a flurry of fusion summons. We'll be playing one copy of Elemental Hero Core. So Core is a relatively new card in that it's never been explored competitively. I'll briefly paraphrase its effect. It's got 27 attack, level 9. It needs 3 Elemental Heroes to summon, so it's pretty expensive. It has to be fusion summon just like heroes, but pretty much if he gets attacked by your opponent, you can double its attack until the end of the damage step, so 5400 defender pretty much makes him a very good deterrent. If he battles either way, he can destroy a monster on the field, which is really good because it's pretty much another removal effect, much like Plasma Vice. You can take out a monster by attacking with 27 and then pop something on the field if you'd like, which is a nice bonus. And that serves as an additional attack deterrent, because even if your opponent somehow takes out this 54 in battle, you can go and kill something as revenge. And finally, it has a recursive ability much like Elemental Hero The Shining, where it goes and lets you revive a level 8 or lower fusion monster from your grave by ignoring its summoning conditions, as long as that's an Elemental Hero monster. So Elemental Hero Core is interesting in that it provides a lot of attack power, but a lot of defensive, recursive power later in the game, so it becomes a safer play off of a card like Miracle Fusion, which we are running 3 copies of. This thing just lets us put more damage on the board, lets us get a free core, lets us get a free anything else, and it's probably the best way to bring out Elemental Hero The Shining, because then we actually have materials that we can banish so that the Shining will have its recursive ability. In many of your minds, this is going to be the part where we go over to the dark side and add some masked heroes into the mix. Now, personally, I like the masked heroes. I realize they're different from elemental heroes, but they did appear in the manga just like elemental heroes and other sub-archetypes of the group, like vision heroes and stuff. And realistically, if you are limiting yourself to fusions already, it's just way too much of a problem if you don't even allow yourself to play masked heroes. Like with no Stratos, no Super Poly, it's suicide. So I decided it is a necessary evil to even remotely test this deck, to be able to have access to Dark Law, but we're going to try and not emphasize that. So, for starters, we'll play 2 copies of Summoner Monk. So Summoner Monk is pretty standard in some variants of heroes. This basically fetches Shadow Mist from your deck at the cost of any spell. We have tons of spells, so that's not a problem. And that will trigger its effect. And that's something you guys are used to, but you can also go and search any of the materials that you may need specifically, like the Sparkman, Wildheart, or the Ocean, and you can use this thing to go and summon Blazeman because its effects trigger on special summon as well, and you can fetch that polymerization. So overall fairly neat. I do prefer the Monk over the Tin Goldfish or Goblinberg because those 2 latter monsters I talked about are more for Xyz summoning, and that's not what this deck is about. This deck's about fusion summoning, so Monk is at least good in that it gets us the fusion materials or the mass change materials. Then we're going to play 3 copies of A Hero Lives. Unfortunately, these are the commons. Sad. But this basically helps you get out, same thing like Summoner Monk, your Shadow Mist or even your Blazeman in a pinch so that you can get your plays started. And I just basically needed more ways to trigger Shadow Mist so that I could fetch Mass Change, if not for Dark Law, for one of the other masked heroes. And that's why Hero Lives is in here. We are, of course, playing 3 copies of Mass Change. This thing, pretty much anytime you draw it, you can use it because you have so many hero monsters, and you have access to any of them from your deck with a variety of searches, so you have options on Mass Change. Pretty much, if you could play more Mass Change, you probably should. Same thing with Polymerization. If I could play more than 3, I probably would. But we are capping out to maximize our chances, and really also so that when we search them, we can go and keep having more targets in the deck left to search. So, what masked heroes are we playing? Well, first of all, we are going to be playing the standard Dark Law and Anki, and these are good because the Dark Law helps you set up something in the first turn if you're going first to hinder your opponent. Anki helps you get more aggression by attacking with its 28 body and then turning itself into Dark Law with its extra copy of Mass Change, so that just helps you end games or lock your opponent down more. For water, we're playing Acid. You guys know this. Acid is Harpy's Feather Duster. You can turn Absolute Zero into this guy, so then you can just wipe your opponent's entire board. Very powerful monster there. Diane is our Earth masked hero with 2800 attack. She has an ability where if she destroys a monster and I think has to send it to the grave, yes, send it to the grave, then you can special summon any level 4 or lower hero from your deck. So you could trigger Shadow Mist, Blaze Man, fetch a specific material, whatever. Diane helps you do that, so that's pretty cool. If you happen to draw any mass change and you want to go for like an Earth hero, you can actually go straight for Diane, get a free Shadow Mist, get another mass change, and then set up Anki or Darklaw for the next turn. Then I'm playing one Koga for the light, mainly because you have a light monster in here, and sometimes you want Koga instead. I almost never go for Koga, but it's available there in case. Especially with Blaze Man turning into Sparkman potentially, you have the option of turning it into a light monster for extra aggression. And similarly, Goka's in here just because of the lack of other fusion monsters available in our pool. We're pretty much just using Goka because Blaze Man sometimes won't need to use that change attribute ability. And if you're getting a polymerization, you can go fuse maybe for Nova Master, kill something, draw a card, mass change into Goka, do extra damage. Goka's ability lets you gain 100 attack for all of your heroes in the grave, so it's pretty much like Escuridao, except Goka's not limited to elemental heroes, it's any hero monster. So sometimes it's enough to cheat a win using mass change. That's really the only reason it's in here, is just because it's another fire option. And finally, it's time to go over some of the tech choices. There's just a handful here because we don't have a ton of room after fleshing the deck out. We're playing 2 copies of Twin Twisters. I experimented with the various types of back row removal, and I found there are often times you want to get rid of multiple back row, which Twin Twisters is good for. And since you can discard Shadow Mist, or just discard any hero and get it right back with like Warrior Returning Alive, Twin Twisters is fairly safe in this strategy. And you pretty much need proactive back row removal, even in game 1, because you might get stopped by a Floodgate spell. I got stopped by Necro Valley the very first game I tested this, and I had no back row hate, so I just lost because I couldn't do anything, and I drew into all of my graveyard recurring cards. Wasn't that fun. You're sometimes going to just see annoying pendulum monsters, you're going to see things like, I don't know, lose 1 turn or skill drain or things like that. So having twisters in the main isn't a bad thing, especially because you have that inherent synergy with a lot of your free replacing cards. We're playing the one Raigeki because this deck needs some way to easily out monsters that will prevent it from making its plays, and it clears the board so you can hopefully push for a game. This deck easily puts 2 or more fusions on the field in a turn, so it easily does 5,000 damage, and that Raigeki will help you win out of nowhere. And I just mentioned that 5k damage, that's why 2 Blazing Mirror Force round out our deck. Blazing Mirror Force is a spin on the original that says when your opponent's monster declares an attack, you destroy all their attack position monsters, then you combine all their attack points, have that value, and you take damage equal to that sum. Then you inflict the same amount of damage to your opponent. So the cool thing is, this thing will usually do somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 damage to your opponent if they're attacking with at least a pair of monsters. So not only do you plus just like you would with Mirror Force, but you can go damage your opponent for anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000, and if you go and follow up with 2 fusions the following turn, because again, your opponent's field's empty with this thing, you can go and potentially win the game. It's also an extremely powerful card to protect things like Ocean, or even more importantly, Darklaw, because Darklaw will then banish all the things that get destroyed, and they won't even trigger in the grave. So overall, I found Blazing Mirror Force to be just the best trap for this deck because of its dual purpose. It protects your guys, and it clears your opponent's board, and it just happens to be better than Mirror Force because it burns your opponent, which helps you take out your opponent even faster. I consider things like Safe Zone, but it's just not good enough. You want removal of your opponent's monsters because, this deck just lacks options in getting rid of cards for free because it doesn't have that extra deck. And why is it blazing when we play A Hero Lives? Well, really, again, you're only taking 2,000 to 3,000 points. If you're playing A Hero Lives, you're either going to win or your deck was so outclassed by your opponent you couldn't win, most likely anyway. Blazing Mirror Force really just helps you cheat those wins where you can damage your opponent out of nowhere. And again, 2k, 3k shouldn't be enough to kill you single-handedly, even if you play that A Hero Lives. It just puts you in a range where your opponent can knock you out if you don't kill them. So, interesting card. I mean, yeah, you could say it has its problems, but in testing, I honestly feel like it is the best option that we have for this. In closing, I just wanted to give my quick debrief about the deck, just my general thoughts after having tested out just fusion heroes. So first of all is the problem of an outclassed deck. If you look at cards like this, Again, I mentioned how Castel and 101 and removal cards like that are just so much more accessible even in this strategy, and they're just so much better than something like Plasma Vice. You can get rid of things without destroying, so that's an advantage. You can get things out for just 2 materials, so it's even more consistent than heroes with all of their searching powers and fusion substituting. So there's that. And even things like Elemental Hero Gaia, like there's the alternative of Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon, does the same thing, but it's permanent, and again, it's a rank 4, so it's just so much easier to make. So that's point number 1. It's just this deck has cards that are outclassed by generic cards nowadays. So if you think in the grand scheme of things, unless you want to play the fusions just for the sake of fun, there really isn't a reason to play these fusions in the first place. Second problem I have with them is these cards are getting power creeped. If you look at Absolute Zero, it needs to leave the field. Shining, it needs to be destroyed by anything, but if you look at cards like this, I mean, again, go back to Honor Arc or Castel. These don't get triggered by, this doesn't get triggered by Honor Arc, this doesn't get triggered by either Honor Arc or Castel. A lot of the heroes' resilience from their power days in YCSs and such, they just don't work anymore because there are new game mechanics that allow you to get around the biggest threats that are created. It used to be you had to play something like Soul Taker to get around this guy, but that's not even the case anymore. And honestly, the Shining is probably one of my less favorite nowadays. It used to be one of my absolute favorites, but you know, it's just too easy to get around these days, and I don't want to banish heroes and destroy my infrastructure in the case I can easily get over it with a rank 4. However, that's not to say that this deck is totally hopeless. For instance, if you look at the extra deck, Nova Master is a very powerful fusion that lets you just draw a card every time you kill a monster in battle, which is pretty sick. And we already know about awesome extra deck masked heroes like Darklaw and Acid. So these are actually some of like the power players that help make sure that this deck has somewhat of an ability to fight for fun. And then I honestly feel like there can potentially be a deck in the future that utilizes these two for some sort of fusion mechanic, but would it be possible without new cards or having access to Stratos or Super Poly? I don't know, maybe time will tell. We'll just have to keep these cards in mind and see if the format ever develops in a way that allows these guys to play to their full potential. If you watched the video in its entirety, thanks. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching as I built this challenge deck that only featured fusion monsters in the extra deck. We're going to go ahead and do the alphabetical profile now. So first off, just one vanilla, it's Elemental Hero Sparkman, a single copy. Then for our effect monsters, we have a Blade Edge, 3 Elemental Hero Blazeman, 1 Ocean, 3 Shadow Mist, 1 Wildheart. Then we have 2 King of the Swamp, and 2 Summoner Monk. For spells, we have 3 A Hero Lives, 3 E-Emergency Call, 3 Fusion Recovery, 3 Mask Change, 3 Miracle Fusion, 3 Polymerization, 1 Raigeki, a Reinforcement of the Army, 2 Warrior Returning Alive, and 2 Twin Twisters. And finally, for the last 2 cards, we have 2 copies of Blazing Mirror Force, which rounds this deck out to 40 cards. Then our 15-card fusion deck here is 1 copy each of Elemental Hero Wild Wingman and Plasma Vice, 2 copies of Absolute Zero, 1 Escuridao, 1 Gaia, 1 Nova Master, 1 The Shining, 1 Core, and then for Masked Heroes we have 1 Acid, 1 Anki, 1 Darklaw, 1 Diane, 1 Goka, and 1 Koga. So let me know down in the description box below what you think of the deck. Again, if you haven't checked out the profile in terms of the step-by-step building process, then I do encourage you guys to check that out as to why my reasoning for some of these choices were before you go and like ask, why is this here? Because chances are that I'll have mentioned something about that. But yeah, feel free to test this thing out. Realistically, again, this is not a competitive deck. The whole point of this was just to see what kind of core could be developed with the goal of bringing out a fusion monster, only no Xyz or anything. I think once in a while it is kind of fun to go with that kind of challenge, but this is entirely for fun purposes. It is not by any means to be competitive, because realistically, if you're trying to be competitive, there's no reason to handicap yourself like this and just go with one type of card. Anyway, that's everything I have for now. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is JDGaming, and I'll see you guys next time.